We want to pivot to the story about the NDP. We have 3 NDP MPs that say they're upset with how the party's interim leader, Don Davies, was selected. We have Leah Gazan, Laurie Idlout, and Jenny Kwan wrote a letter to the NDP Executive National Council complaining about the process, saying they say it missed the mark. It goes on to say, it's clear by our own disappointment that it failed to uphold democratic and transparent principles. This left some caucus members excluded in the process. After our historic loss, how we proceed forward matters. Selecting an interim leader in this fashion sets them up for failure, not success. After that letter was leaked to the media, those same MPs say it was not intended for the public, and they called the leak unfortunate. Alberta NDP MP Heather McPherson is here with me in studio. Nice to see you. Thanks for coming in.
Hi, Peter. Nice to see you.
What does it say? What does it tell us that the internal process of these, 3 of 7 members of your caucus feel this way?
Well, I mean, I think what it says is this was a pretty unique election, right? This
Yep.
was a tough one for the NDP. This was hard, and so we're trying to figure out what this looks like, what this next Parliament will look like for the New Democrats, how we rebuild a party that I think Canadians deeply need in our democracy, and so it's tough, and there's going to be tough conversations. Do I have any doubt whatsoever that every single one of the 7-member caucus of the NDP will be working as hard as they possibly can to fight for Canadians? Absolutely not. I mean, I'm deeply comfortable that as a caucus, our goal and what we're going to be doing when Parliament comes back next week is exactly what New Democrats have always been doing. We will hold the government accountable. We will fight for everyday Canadians. We will make sure that workers' rights are protected, and that's the work that we have to do. There's going to be some challenges. There is. That's going to happen. We see it with the Conservatives. They've been having some challenges lately. Yep. The messaging out of the government has been far from stellar. So, this is a start of a new Parliament, start of a bit of a unique time, and I think there's just a bit of growing pains going on.
How did you find yourself reacting as you read that letter for the first time? Were you nodding along to parts of it, or were you saying, guys, come on, we need to rally here?
we have a constitution, and from my perspective, the Constitution, we followed the letter of the Constitution, and there was some consultation certainly with me. I don't want to pretend that I know what everybody else's experience was for me, and so I'm very supportive of Don Davies being in that position, but I also think that we do need to always listen to voices that ask for our party to be more democratic, ask for our party to do more. That said, I want to make it very, very clear. The Constitution does say that the Federal Council is in charge of selecting the interim leader, and the Federal Council, I think, did an excellent job of doing that.
It'd be one thing if 3 members of your party, your caucus, were saying, hey, this is bad and we need to fix it. It's a different thing when it's 3 out of 7. Like, it's almost half of your caucus.
Well, and I mean, lots of folks have been saying, like, it will be easier because there's only 7 of you. That's not the case.
Right.
Anyone who's been a parent of teenagers knows that it's not necessarily the smaller the number, the easier the path is there. So listen, we've got incredibly strong members of Parliament in our caucus. Every one of those voices is important at that caucus table, and we're gonna be meeting, we're gonna be talking, and we're gonna be getting to work for Canadians. I mean, that's what New Democrats need to be focusing on, and that's what we will be focusing on.
And to do that, you sort of have to put this aside. So who needs to do what to make that happen?
I mean,
is it Don Davies?
In my opinion, what we need to do is sit down and think about what Canadians need. This particular Liberal government made a lot of promises during this campaign. They've already backed off some of those promises. Mm-hmm. We already don't have a budget. We already have a government that doesn't want to be accountable to Canadians. We already have a government that I think requires New Democrats to be in the House of Commons holding them accountable. And, interestingly enough, we still do have the balance of power, and we can push the government to do some of those things that I think are important to Canadians. We look at labor unrest that's happening across this country right now. That's where New Democrats are important. We look at some of the things that we know are happening for Canadians, the fact that housing is so expensive, the fact that groceries are, out of control. These are things that you need to have New Democrats in the House for. We watched the United States. We've seen what a 2-party system does to a democracy. It's not good. Canadians need New Democrats. We need to rebuild this party. We need to come out strong because Canadians need us.
And yet, to your point, we're doing a program today. We're talking about Canada Post. We're talking about the looming strike and what's going to happen to workers there. And we have you, as a representative of the New Democratic Party, on talking about this internal battle rather than the issues facing.
Well, to be fair, though, Peter, you're talking about that, but I'm trying to talk a little bit about housing and affordability issues as well.
I think it's fair that there are questions about this and it's unresolved. And I guess the point I'm trying to make is, what do you do to get it resolved, and how important is it to get that done quickly?
Well, like I said earlier, every party is going through a little bit of struggles right now. And so what we all need to be doing is having conversations. We need to be having conversations amongst ourselves, because let's not pretend that what happened on April 28th was great for New Democrats. That was a tough night. Yeah. We lost some really excellent MPs. I think about my colleague Blake Desjardins, who didn't get elected in Edmonton. He's fantastic, and he deserves to have a seat in that parliament. So we need to have those difficult conversations. And then, even more important than that, we need to start having conversations with Canadians. We need to be out in communities talking to Canadians so that they understand why we're here. And that's what rebuilding the New Democratic Party is going to take, and that's what it's going to look like. And I guarantee every one of those 7 members of our caucus is going to be doing that work with me.
You need a national leader to do that. How important is it to you to get a permanent, long stint, like to get this out of the way, move forward with whoever is going to be the long-term leader of this party?
Sorry to interrupt you.
You know what I'm asking.
I have full confidence in Don Davies. I have full confidence that he will be an excellent interim leader for us. But you're right. We need to get a leader in place that can take the party forward. And this is a minority parliament. This is a very, very... this parliament could last 4 years, or it could last 4 months, and we don't know what that is. So yeah, of course, we need to have a leader in place so that we are ready when the next election comes to put our case forward to Canadians, to make Canadians understand how important it is that there are New Democrats that are sitting around the table, that are pushing the government, that are holding whatever the government of the day is accountable for the promises they make to Canadians.
Would you be that leader, if asked?
I've been asked by a number of people, and I haven't made a decision. We haven't seen what the race looks like. There's a lot of things that I'm focusing on right now that revolve around making sure that this parliament, this government is accountable to Canadians, and that the Liberals and Prime Minister Carney are living up to the promises he's made to Canadians.
Parliament resumes next week. There's been a lot of talk about official party status. Right now, you don't have it. How much harder does that make the job, and what do you individually and then as a party need to do to make yourselves effective in spite of that?
I mean, Peter, I'm a federal New Democrat from Alberta. I'm not worried about hard work. I'm fine. So yeah, it's of course it's harder. Of course it's harder when we don't have the resources. New Democrats have never had the same sort of resources that the Conservatives have, that the Liberals have. That's not made us any less effective. I mean, to be perfectly honest, you look at the last Parliament, what the members of Parliament from the NDP were able to accomplish in the last Parliament versus what the 100+ Conservatives were able to accomplish is pretty telling. We're hard workers. We're going to keep working hard.
All right. We're going to leave it there. And when you get some of this leadership stuff sorted out, we'll have you back on to talk about that and hopefully back to the issues.
Excellent. Thanks, Peter.
Thank you. No, I appreciate this. Alberta NDP, Heather McPherson. Now, let's bring back in the power panel. Emily, Michelle, Françoise Boivin, and Kate. I guess, Françoise, why don't we start with you? What is your sense of where we are in this story? And as we touched to, the notion that they do need somebody who's not the interim leader, a longer-term solution to their leadership problems.
Definitely, they need to have it sooner than later. I was listening to Heather, and I admire her positiveness, but quite the challenge ahead. But at the same time, I know Alberta does look at Quebec sometimes for some ideas on certain policy, and I'll tell them give a few pointers. Look at the Parti québécois in the province, which was left with 2 or 3 seats before their new leader, young leader, unknown person, Paul Saint-Pierre Plamondon, came in, and they managed, being just 3 and now 5 after a few by-elections, to monopolize a lot of the political airspace. So it's always feasible, but at the same time, you need to be unified. So all that that discussion. And I get that the three MPs, when they wrote to the national office, didn't expect this to be on the front page of the Globe and Mail. But when there is a leak, you know that it means something. In labor relation, we always say, it doesn't happen for nothing. So there's more to it than the actual question of the interim leader. It can be all about how the NDP acts, and I mean the party versus the caucus. A lot of people are contesting the campaign director. So have they found a way to maybe with a curve to brasser, mix up a few things? So it's quite possible. They need to resolve this. Don Davies need to put his hat of interim leader quickly to make sure that this 7-member caucus works together and that nobody is tempted to maybe jump ship in case the reaction is not to their liking. But their challenges are humongous. But the faster they can decide on a new leader, I think they can then look forward for real instead of looking backwards, sideways, behind their back. Leave that to the Liberals. It's not the NDP who does that usually. And I'll just say this. In 2011, when Jack Layton died, I don't know if the Constitution changed, but nobody consulted us in any shape or form before they name an interim leader. Had I known, I could have written a letter. I would have joyfully, but no, we were happy with Nicole Turmel. And if you're starting to be mad because of an interim leader is named who will not run as a leader, good grief, people, you're not out of the wood yet.
Kate, can I ask a dumb question? From the outside, I would look at this and say, I bet you all the other parties are just gleefully watching this like cable television. And yet a functioning parliament, this all matters.
Yeah.
How does this look from the windows of every other party's office?
Well, if you've been following the news at all, which I know you have, the Conservative Party has its own internal struggles.
Some issues, yeah.
And the Liberal Party last fall was going through that too.
Some issues.
I don't think that other political observers or parties watch what's unfolding with any of their counterparts or opponents with any sense of glee.
Right.
I do think that the NDP, as evidenced by the conversation you just had with Ms. McPherson, has a big challenge ahead of it in terms of maintaining peace in the Valley with a smaller caucus, not having the resources that would come with official party status. And I think the big existential question for the NDP, if you will, is, do they want to be the conscience of Parliament or do they actually want to govern? Because I think who they choose for their leader may well be a different person depending on answering that question. And we'll see, how the rules of their leadership race dictate that. But I think that that's really at the crux of the NDP's challenge right now. We saw what happened when they didn't create contrast and differentiation with the Liberal Party. And this one looks to be, positioning as perhaps more centrist than even the last one. So right. The NDP has an opportunity here, from my perspective, to carve out a new path for itself. But there's going to be a segment of voters who just will not bring themselves to vote New Democrat if they don't think there's a chance that party can govern. And I think that is the real question for New Democrats as they look to select a leader. Are they going to choose a winner? Or are they going to choose somebody that's going to, be the conscience of Parliament?
Emily, nobody's had an easy run as leader since the election. Does Don Davies, what has he got to do to try to put a lid on this and just get the party moving forward?
I don't think that should be his role.
Okay.
I think when you lose that bad, you don't need to squaw conversation. I think conversation is the only way you're going to actually rebuild a movement. And I think it's important to understand that what's happening to the NDP also happened to the more left part of the Democrats in the US, and it happened to a lot of more progressive parties over the Western world in general. And so there is a real question of how does the left win that needs to be asked. And I do agree with Kate that there is an existential question that is, should we be, the conscience of Parliament? Are we aiming to form a government? If so, what is even our ideology? Where do we stand? Where do we fit? How do we include people who identify with NDP values but haven't necessarily voted NDPs? How do we include that in the conversation? And I'm witnessing in Quebec a similar existential crisis with Québec Solidaire, but Québec Solidaire is a party that has a much stronger democratic culture, so there's a bunch of unofficial conversations that are happening left and right around Montreal in the different regions of Quebec to trying to figure out what's next for the movement of the left. And I'm not seeing that happening with the NDP, because the NDP is having, although it's on the left, it's having a very I'd say conservative party model, which is just, it's run like any other party, and that's creating a tension. My recommendation would be use your unofficial think tank, which is the Broadbent Institute or something like that, to be having the existential conversations that clearly you're not able to have as a party. Because if only 3 MPs are just writing something and that gets leaked in the media, it means that within the official structures of parliament, you don't have the trust to have hot conversations. So have a third organization like the Broadband or whatever else you want to have be the host for those conversations, because if you don't have them as a movement rather than just as a party, you're going to run into the next electoral cycle with a really, really hard problem on your hand, perhaps even harder than the one you just went through.
Michelle, what do you make of that?
Well, so if I was to be cynical, I would say, the NDP, at least we're talking about them. I don't think that they've been really mentioned much since the election campaign. This was a way, kind of a ham-footed way, to re-up the fact that there is an interim leader in Don Davies, which probably most Canadians are completely unaware of, but potentially there's another chance that they're getting a little bit of media here. However, I don't think that they were that crafty to get that attention. I don't understand why this didn't have a text change that would kind of solve the problem of actually consulting each other with 7 people. It's pretty manageable, but they've got to do a little bit better. And as Emily's just said, there's clearly people who are not happy, who are unhappy with how the organization is run, and that's natural after a brutal election. And many of us have been through brutal elections before as well, maybe not quite that bad, but it's going to take some time. And, I think that, my advice would not be to rush into something, that they really do have to have that fundamental conversation within themselves and amongst themselves about what are they putting forward to Canadians? Are they trying to be a third option? Or are they trying to be the conscience of Parliament or something like that, and keeping whoever's in government to account? But until they solve that, I'm not sure that they can go forward with who's going to be their leader. I think that for such a small caucus, it's just going to be absolutely fundamental that they get onto the same page in very short order, because, everything kind of rests on those 7 individuals as they kind of start out on this next path. So we'll see how it kind of shakes out.
I'm going to have that chain of thought between Kate saying you got to figure out who you want to be, and you saying, Michelle, that will define who the next leader is, rattling around my head until they pick the next leader. Let's jump to the conclusions. Who do you think would be in the running for this job?
There is always a lot of talk of the Western New Democrats, Premier Wabkanu and former Premier Rachel Notley. I suspect what we'll see happen this time, it's a bit of crystal balling, but perhaps more of a regional strategy on the part of the NDP, look to regain some of the areas that they lost in the last election. I'm thinking of southwestern Ontario, northern Ontario, of course, parts of BC and Toronto. It is a tough proposition for a successful New Democrat left-leaning politician to look at the state of the federal NDP and say, this is something I want to come in and lead with, a minivan of party members, like now is my moment. I think that they will let somebody else have that moment. Perhaps there will be some modest gains in the regions of the country that were just lost, and then you position well to hand off to somebody who has a little more political prowess.
I was going to save you for the end, Françoise, because I'm interested in your take here. But what are there names banding around in NDP circles right now as to who the long-term leader will be?
Oh my God!
I'm putting you on the spot.
Well, we hear. Yeah, I know, but I hear through the grapevines, the one you interviewed, Heather,
Yeah.
a lot of people, but there's a difference between what some of the members would like and what the party needs. So that is not necessarily clear at this point in time. I hear a lot of people like Alexandre Boulris, how in the hell can you survive an election like 2025 in Quebec when you're the NDP? Because he's organized, and Emily touched that base. I mean, this guy won because this guy was prepared, but you need to expand that to more ridings. And I go back to 2003 or 2004 when Jack Layton was elected leader. He came, but with a plan. Yes, he made the decision between conscience versus governing. And once he presented and was accepted and voted as the leader, they knew he wanted to become a prime minister at some point in time. And he had a plan that took years in the making. That meant going to get some people that were not necessarily in the usual NDP tent, like Tom Mulcair, like myself, like many others, building that orange wave that took years in the making. Is there anybody right now that I see that has that stamina? Because it's not going to be an overnight. We're not the Liberals. We cannot just change a leader and go from minus 25 to plus 25. When you're the NDP...
Nobody thought they could either.
But it's not a one-election strategy.
You have to work... I know. So you have to work so hard and often harder. So I'm sure there's somebody somewhere that has that plan. And I agree with Emily. The Broadband Institute might be a good conduit for that. So yes, and taking their time to make the right decision. But no, don't wait too long, because it might be even more risky for the NDP if they wait too long.
Emily, you sort of started us down this path talking about maybe the Broadband Institute is the place to have that conversation. How do they leverage that? I mean, I remember I was on the Jack Layton's campaign plane in that 2003. I listened to the Barrett's Privateers on the back of that plane more times than I care to recount. But I watched him do that work, right? I watched him evolve that message. Emily, it feels like they're not even back to where they started. They're well below it.
Oh, well below.
I love how Kate immediately saw, I think in her body language reaction, she saw what I was seeing in that, because part of the idea for the Broadband Institute was also inspired by, the Manning Institute and the work that the Conservatives had done on the right in terms of using think tank as a way to organize without the official, but basically the limitations of what a political party is. And I think Broadband definitely has a role to play in that. And behind the scene, it played a big role in the first of all, the election of Jagmeet Singh at the leadership of the NDP. And so definitely who's going to be next in the race, the Institute will have also a say in that. Also played a role in the election of Olivia Chow as Mayor of Toronto and Valérie Plante as Mayor of Montreal. And so in terms of who's next, depending on how the NDP actually or Broadband actually creates a conversation, create a social movement, because you need a social movement for the left to reappear politically as a political party. You have social movements who were really present in the 2010s. It's been a long time since we've seen a hashtag that was actually progressive go viral and lead to actual protests in this country. We haven't seen that since the pandemic, really. And so you need to have energy, momentum on movement, civil society, which will be perhaps easier if Mark Carney leans a little bit more to the right. It creates a positional energy within civil society, and that creates perhaps more ambitious name to go forward, including actually perhaps even current mayors who will not be in power forever.
Michelle, I'm going to give you the last word, but I really only got about 30 seconds.
Yeah, I would just say it's going to be really tough to recruit somebody who has a job right now to come in and take this over and be sitting outside of Parliament when you only have 7 members. Party's broke. I don't mean to be a downer, but it's going to be really tough to recruit somebody. And I go back to, they've got to have a real philosophical discussion. Are they going to be really left wing? Are they going to be the Avi Lewis kind of environmentalists, progressive, super progressive agitators? Or are they going to try and go back to that blue collar labor working group who I always kind of think Jack Layton was much more of a leader of. And so I think that until they wrestle that together, they've just got to kind of work on trying to figure out who they are and then who their leader is.
All right, we're going to leave it there. Thank you all. That was my first power panel. So
Great job.
I navigated
yeah,
it.
good job.
Thank you all for helping me through it. The power panel: Kate Harrison, Françoise Boivin, Michelle Cadario, and Emily Nicolas.